Rev up your engines!
Well, it looks like the quality of Toyotas, at least overseas, is starting to go down. Here's an email from an Australian viewer here, Bass, who says, "Hey, Scotty, you talk about how they make cars cheaper all the time? Well, Toyota's an exception here in Australia. I have a Yaris hybrid, just not working. Most of the electronics. Stupid alarms drive me nuts. The lane assist is off. Brake assist is off. Tends to brake for nothing. Sign reading is useless crap. I have a delay in gas response, so-so gas mileage, crappy soundproofing, doors don't shut properly, and rambling noises. Looks like they're making them cheaper. Quality's obviously down on them. Doors don't even shut properly. You never used to see that with Toyota. Here in the United States, the doors and everything seem to shut properly. We seem to get a higher quality one than you're getting in Australia. But, I mean, that just kind of shows the general people trying to make a profit and cutting quality costs on stuff. I know for a fact that Toyota sells little work delivery vans in Europe. They say they're Toyotas, but they're actually rebadged Fiats. Now, they hadn't done that in the United States yet, and I doubt if they ever will, because, hey, people in the United States would find out fast. That's just a Fiat. Toyota's selling Fiats. What is up, you know? They're doing it in Europe, but they haven't done that in the United States, and I think they use Australia as a proving grounds for some of their stuff, so maybe they're sending you some of their crap. Marshall says, should I buy a Toyota Sequoia 05 or a Honda Pilot 06? I could buy a Sequoia 05 with 290,000 kilometers or a Honda Pilot 2006 with the same mileage. Which one would you recommend? If you don't care about gas mileage, get a Sequoia. They can run forever. They're well made. They're giant vehicles. They're a lot bigger than a Pilot is inside. They're humongous, right? The Honda Pilot's going to get much better gas mileage for sure. If you're not driving that far, go ahead and get the Sequoia. But if you're putting 15, 20,000 miles a year on, you'd probably get the Pilot. They're well made, just because you're going to get a heck of a lot better gas mileage than you own the Sequoia. The Sequoias have the giant Toyota V8. They're big, heavy vehicles. They are tremendous gas hogs. Most of my customers with Toyota Sequoias, and when I ask them, what kind of gas mileage you get? They say, I don't know. I'm afraid. I know it's low, so I just fill it up whenever it gets low. I don't want to know. Now, with the Pilots, not the case. It's going to get much better gas mileage. Most of my customers that have Pilots versus Sequoia, they'll get at least 10, 12 miles a gallon better gas mileage than they will in a Toyota. And usually even more than that, because it's a lighter vehicle with a smaller engine than the Toyota has. Cherise says, my Honda Civic 02, the alternator belt keeps breaking and screeching. I replaced the alternator from AutoZone September 7th, 2022. A month later, it broke again. You change the alternator, but if it keeps breaking the belt, what you want to do is check the brackets, check the alignment. Get yourself a straight edge, a ruler or anything. Put it on the belt in the front of the pulley, and you'll probably find that the belt isn't aligned right. Something's bent so that instead of the belt being straight, it's at an angle. And it only takes a tiny little angle. It'll ride wrong, and it'll keep breaking the belt. Now, also look at anything else that drives. You change the alternator. Let's say it also runs the water pump. If the water pump's wearing and wobbling, it'll make the belt snap too. You've got some problem in that drivetrain for the drive belt that's making it break all the time. I mean, if the alternator was bad and locked up, sure, but you got a brand new alternator, and I doubt that the bearing's locked up already. Any mechanic can check that easily. When the belt's off, you just spin the alternator with your hand, and if it's bad, it'll make noise and wobble, and if it isn't, it'll just spin. Odds are, for some reason, it's on an angle, candid, like a worn water pump, or the crank pulley is worn or bent, so it's no longer straight. That's why you get a straight edge. And if you see, look, it's not straight anymore, it's bent a little, then you got to fix why it's bent. Bill S. says, I'm thinking about buying a new car that's been sitting on a dealer's lot for 2 years. I found a new 2021 Land Cruiser. Should I buy it? It's been sitting on a dealer's lot for a couple of years. First, I want to do a search of that thing to see, is it really brand new? Was it a demo? Does it have a bunch of miles on it? Or perhaps, was it bought, wrecked, and then they bought it back? If it has never been driven and it's only got 4 or 5, 8 miles or whatever from them moving it around, driving it from the parking lot out to the showroom, whatever, it's brand new. It's really not going to have any problems if it's sitting inside. On the other hand, let's say it was sitting outside in the lot. I wouldn't even buy it then. It's been sitting for 2 years rotting away. The tires will be somewhat dry rotted. It keeps me wondering, people always want those things if it hasn't been sold. It's been sitting there for 2 years. Maybe they're asking too much money. I don't know. The whole thing sounds fishy. fishy. And when something sounds fishy like that, my advice is walk away. Because if a vehicle's been sitting for 2 years outside, now if it's inside, it's a different story. But if it's outside, it's rusting, the tires are dry rotting, the sun's beating down on it, I wouldn't touch it. And a lot, just out in the elements for 2 years. Whenever something sounds fishy, my advice is go to some place where the things don't smell fishy anymore, where the air is sweet and the deal seems normal, and there's not something weird going on with it. Gray Shawl says, I have a weird headlight issue. I got a 2010 Toyota RAV4. Both my high beams start working. It's not bulbs. So I ordered relays. Before I got my relays, the fog lamps also stopped working. When I changed the relays, the fog lamps of the high beams would still not function. All the fuses were okay. What do you think it is? The first thing you want to check is ground wiring. If you get a weak ground wire, it's going to short out a lot of systems. So check the ground wiring for the headlights, the high beams, and for the fog lamps. If the wiring ground is good, you get a meter and you can measure it, and if it's perfectly good, there's continuity, there's no corrosion, odds are your headlight switch is bad. That eventually will go out and do that. That part of the switch will break, but you got to buy the whole switch assembly. That's the only way they sell them. So you could get a headlight switch assembly, and that's probably what's doing it. Now, if you don't want to go through the hassle of taking a steering column and all that crap apart, and the low beams work but not the high beams, heck, you could easily just get yourself a toggle switch and rewire the high beams and the fog lamps to run off a toggle switch. Simple wiring. You get like a 30 amp fuse, some wire, toggle switch, and just wire it directly from the battery to the switch, to the fuse, to the high beams, and just bypass the whole thing if you don't want to have to take the steering column apart and buy an expensive Toyota switch assembly. Con Harrison says, if brake rotors are rusty, do they need to be resurfaced if there's no vibration or any other issue? No, not unless they're falling apart. The only part that really matters is your brake pads squeeze the outsides and they're shiny, right? Now, most of them have holes in them for air to circulate, because when you're driving a car, all the kinetic energy of motion is turned into heat when you slam on the brakes. And the holes help them dissipate that heat. If they don't shake and they work fine, hey, great. Now, on the other hand, if you live up north, unfortunately, with those holes, the rust gets inside and they become structurally unsound. If you hit your brakes, they don't shake anything, but you hear crunching all the time. The crunching is that the metal is so worn it's crunching, then you want to put new rotors in. Don't resurface them, replace them. And truthfully, about resurfacing brake rotors, I never do it anymore on modern cars, because the rotors are so cheaply made, they've warped. Because the steel was cheaply made, and now it's warped. If you resurface them and they're flat again, guess what? There's less metal. They will re-warp even faster. I've seen people turn rotors, and then they warp 3,000 miles later. If they are, just go buy new ones. They're cheap enough these days. Buy new ones. You're always going to see rust. It's bare metal, and it will rust, especially in salt, and that's superficial rust in most cases, as long as they're not grinding and making it shake when you brake. Swan Roll says, good morning, Scotty. Got a fuel pump that works, but it won't start unless it's jumped with power. It's a 93 MR2. I'm not sure. Wiring, ICM, or ECM. Thanks. First thing you want to do, if it's got a fuel pump relay, just replace the fuel pump relay. It could be the relay sticking. It's not getting power, right? Now, if it's not that, and it always starts when you send power to it, here's my advice. Run a wire from the battery to a switch with like 15 amp fuse. Then run that back to the fuel pump. And pretend it's an airplane. You say, start car, contact, and then flip the fuel pump switch on, and then start the car and let it run that way. Rather than going through the entire computer issue and all that way, it's much simpler to just add a little toggle switch to turn your fuel pump on and off. And you'll bypass all that computer stuff. It's an old car. It's a 93, so you really want to go through the whole computer system. You could easily just rewire it if it runs fine that way. Angel Conde said, what are your thoughts on the Saturn Sky? Well, I just saw one the other day when I was driving Rhode Island to Tennessee. They're beautiful cars, and they rode quite well. They're fun to drive around in. But of course, you know, they don't make Saturns anymore, and GM messed up a whole bunch of stuff. Now, truth be told, the transmissions on those things were relatively weak. They were one of those early computer-controlled electronic shifting transmissions. They had a lot of problems. As they age, they could be really problematic. They're beautiful looking cars, and they are fun to drive. I had a customer in Houston one, and he liked it, but it was a toy for him because he was only putting a couple thousand miles a year on it. He was always bringing it to me to fix stuff because it was always breaking down. As they age, they're not the most reliable things, but they're beautiful cars. You want a toy. If you run around the weekend, hey, you can get them dirt cheap. Everybody knows they're not worth all that much money. Check it out. Check out Elon Musk's picture. I've got it all figured out now. Look, he's really the reincarnation of John Candy. And of course, John Candy was a comedian. So actually, it all makes total sense now that all of Elon's rantings is just a giant joke. He's John Candy and he's pulling a joke on everyone. Now it finally makes sense. You wonder, why is he saying this? Why is he saying that? He's actually a comedian. That is what's behind all of this. The lifted eyebrow, I mean, there he is, John Candy in the flesh. Only at one point in time, he made it up to being the richest man on earth. Well, people always like a good joke, you know? Maybe he's pulling a joke on everyone. I always wondered what happened to John Candy. You know, he seemed to have died at an awful early age. Well, maybe he just turned into Elon Musk, and now he's pulling jokes all over the planet. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.